Hey, what up? It's your boy Z Flow, and today I want to do a discussion video about Reynad's recently released Q&A video about his game The Bazaar, where he talks about some questions that people have had, and he goes deeper into explaining some details about his game. In that video, he actually addresses some of the stuff that I talk about in my previous video that I made. And speaking of that video, I do want to talk about that video a little bit before I get into the rest of this. So before I start, I just want to say that that video got quite a bit of negative feedback. If you noticed, which I think is actually completely deserved, right? I think it makes a lot of sense, and I definitely made a lot of mistakes in that video, which I want to address in this video to show that I'm trying to improve my content, make it better, and I'm not gonna make the same mistakes in the future. Someone from what I've read in terms of like responses from that video, the biggest concerns that people had with that video, like the reason why a lot of people didn't like it, is because um, it really shows my ignorance towards the deck building genre. I did mention in that video that I am primarily a Hearthstone player, but what I didn't realize is how much I just didn't know about the Bazaar's game mechanics and deck building genre game mechanics in general. So in this video, I just want to address that, show what I've learned, show that I do now understand exactly what game building means. I do just want to say that I am still a beginner, of course, but now I've got all the basics down. So hopefully that will lead to more constructive discussions, right? And it will help make my content more viable as a whole. Now, one good thing about all the negative feedback that I got from that previous video, it helped really open my eyes to the type of audience that the Bazaar holds. A really big portion of that audience are deck building veterans, right? People who have played games like Star Realm and Dominion for a very long time. So they're huge fans of the deck building genre, which is why they're really excited for the Bazaar, which makes a lot of sense. What I do want to mention though is that I think the Bazaar will open up the deck building genre to a whole bunch of new players, right? People like me who have played Hearthstone for a very long time, or who have watched Reynad stream, or I've just played other card games. I think a lot of those people are going to check out the Bazaar and they're going to play the Bazaar because they're really interested about it. And I feel like a lot of those players, just like me, won't have that much knowledge about deck building games from playing previous titles like Star Realms or Dominion. Like they just won't have had experience to it, just like how I didn't. So I want this video not only to prove that I now know more about the deck building genre as a whole, but to also introduce some of those Hearthstone players or other card game players to what the deck building genre is like, how the game mechanics work, the very basics of it at least. So, we can all be on the same page, on the same footing. So, hopefully that'll help everybody out. Okay, so right here is the mock-up board that is on Reynad's Indiegogo campaign. One of the concerns that people had about my previous video is that they thought that I was analyzing and talking about this mock-up board a little bit too much. So their argument was that since it is just a mock-up, it's no real indication of what the final game board will look like in the Bazaar. And I think that's a totally reasonable argument. I think that's completely fair, makes a lot of sense. Reynad himself says in his new Q&A video that the final board will most likely not look anything like this. So I don't want to say that this, like, I'm not going to use this board as like, oh, this is what the Bazaar will look like. I just want to use this board as an example to show and explain what I've learned about deck building games and the basic mechanics of it. All right, so this is just gonna be an example. So for my example, let's assume that both players start out with 10 gold coins in their deck. All right, and that's all they have in their deck. Since you draw 5 cards every turn, all of these 5 cards will be gold coins. Just pretend that they're gold coins. Now, for the sake of my example, we're going to assume that these tokens over here is the store where you buy more cards. In my previous video, I thought that these were minions, right? Like in Hearthstone. But I have since learned that that is not necessarily the case. In this example, I'm going to say it's the store. Now, that doesn't mean it is the store, but for this example, let's just assume that it is. Now, let's start with this King Slime card over here. this king slime token, let's pretend that it costs 5 gold coins. You've just drawn the 5 gold coins over here. If you spent all 5 gold coins to buy this king slime token, you would buy it. It would get shuffled into your deck or the discard pile. But for the sake of the example, let's say it's just the deck. And now you would effectively have 11 cards in your deck. The 10 gold coins that you started with, plus this king slime card. You end your turn. Next turn, you draw another 5 cards. Now you have a chance of drawing that king slime card that you bought. Now, obviously, you might not draw it, but let's say you do. Now you would have the king slime card and 4 other gold coin cards. With the gold coin cards, you could use that to buy more cards and shuffle them into your deck. But now that you've drawn your king slime card, you can now play it, and whatever its effect is or whatever it does happens. Like, let's say it attacks your opponent's face. Now that happens. So one of the big differences is that gold coins aren't like mana in Hearthstone. That was one of the mistakes that I made in my last video. I thought that the gold coins were similar to mana in Hearthstone, but it's really not the case at all. These tokens over here in the store, they don't cost coins to play. They cost coins to buy, to shuffle into your deck, and then when you draw them, you could just play them without having to like rebuy them or anything like that. So that's one of the key differences. And that's really where the name deck building comes. I mean, it's kind of self-explanatory, right? But that's really where the name deck building comes from. You buy the cards, they get shuffled into your deck, making your deck bigger and stronger, and then you draw the cards that you bought, and then you play them. Now, to anyone who's even touched the game Star Realms or Dominion before, this is going to be like, yeah, no shit, right? This is like obvious, like complete basic, like bone bare basics. But once again, this is for beginners like myself and other players who've just played games like Magic the Gathering and Hearthstone and stuff like that, who aren't really familiar with this type of card game. So yeah, that's about it. Like, let's say this card cost 3 gold coins and this card cost 2 gold coins, and you had 5 in your hand. You could spend 3 on that, 2 on that. It gets shuffled into your deck, and now you'd have 13 cards in your deck. The 10 gold coins that you started with, the king slime that you bought on your first turn, and then this card and this card that are now shuffled. And like, if this cost 1 gold coin, you could spend all 5 gold coins to buy it, and then you'd shuffle 5 of those into your deck, so on and so forth. And hence the deck building. That about sums up like the very basics of deck building games. And hopefully now I've proven to the Star Realms and Dominion players who are watching the video, like okay, I'm no master obviously, but now I do at least understand the very basics of how deck building games work, so I can more freely talk about them. And for people who are coming in from like Hearthstone and stuff like that, they now also understand like just how deck building games work, so they're not confused or so they're not misinformed or anything like that. One of the reasons, like, you see this boxing glove right here? That actually should have tipped me off in the last video that this isn't for minions, because as you see right here, the boxing glove is a weapon, and it's right there on the board, or whatever that is, with like this hammer looking thing. So I probably should have been able to tell right then and there that that's not for minions, but oh well, at least I learned now. So yeah, there we go. And I do just want to apologize to some of the people who watched my previous video and were really upset. Some of the more veteran deck building game players, like, I'm pretty sure a lot of them were like, yo, who the fuck is this guy? Some rando, just, like completely messing up what deck building games are about. I do apologize. I don't want to misrepresent or misinform anybody. Those were my genuine thoughts at the time as a Hearthstone player, and I was really excited to make a video about the Bazaar. But now I realize, if I want to make videos about the Bazaar and make discussion videos about them like I'm doing right now, I need to prove that I understand what the Bazaar, what kind of game it is. But now that I have done so, hopefully we're all even now, we're all square, and we can now go on to the actual meat of the video, which is, discussing Reynad's Q&A video. So in this video, I just want to, I'll just briefly run down all the stuff that Reynad talks about in his video and then give my take on what he says. And now that I have just proven I understand what deck building games are, hopefully I can provide more substantial commentary on what Reynad's saying. Keep in mind that since I have played games like Hearthstone for a very long time, and I'm quite proficient at those kind of games, I do have a very good understanding of what like tempo versus value is, what win conditions are. So even if I'm not 100% on the deck building aspect, on just general game theory, I do have a firm understanding. So hopefully, I can provide some helpful information with that. All right, now let's begin. So the wizard. This is the first class that Reynad mentions. He says it's a very spell-heavy class. Now, what are spells? Spells in this game are cards that you buy from the store. And instead, so the King Slime example, you spend 5 coins to buy the King Slime. It gets shuffled into your deck, and in order to play that card, you have to draw it again and then play it. But with spells, you buy the card from the store, and then the effect happens right away. You just immediately use it. One of the questions that I have that I'm not 100% sure about is whether the spell gets used right away and then gets shuffled into your deck, or whether it gets used right away and then it's just gone forever. I'm not 100% sure. I'm leaning more towards like it's just gone forever as like a trade-off for the immediate effect. But once again, I can't be too sure. I guess we'll find out from future updates. Unless I've missed something, and then you could just let me know right now. He mentions it's very good late game. Now, why would something that has an immediate effect be helpful late game? If you think about Hearthstone, well, sometimes spells are good late game, like if you just need to find lethal, but normally spells are better for like tempo, which Reynad does mention. The reason why spells would be really helpful late game in the Bazaar specifically is because it is a deck building game. You have to keep in mind that your deck gets bigger over the course of the game. Let's say you start out with 10 cards. By like the final few turns, you might have like 30 cards in your deck. If you bought a spell and it just got shuffled into your deck, what are the chances that you draw that card? Like slim to none. But since you buy it and the effect happens immediately, you don't have to waste, shuffling through your garbage ass deck to get your spell. You can just use it right away. But since it is used right away, Reynad does mention that it's good for tempo, it's good for aggression, which is true. But the wizard isn't all about just going face. It does have a potion sub-archetype. Reynad doesn't really go into a lot of detail in the video about what that means, but we can just assume that it's a different style of deck that you can make for the wizard. A lot of these decks, a lot of these classes are very flexible. Like you can make different styles of decks within each class, which I really like. I do think that about sums it up for the wizard. So the next class is the vampire. So this class, Reynad mentions, is very flexible, which is really good because any class that's very flexible is very skill testing. So the big thing with the vampire is that you spend health to buy more cost efficient cards. What that means is, in the King Slime example that I keep using, King Slime costs 5 gold coins normally, but with the vampire, let's say it just costs like 2 gold coins but 5 life. That's basically what that means, or at least from my understanding, that's what that means. So with that sort of mechanic in place, you can get very strong decks very quickly at the expense of health. Since more powerful cards are cheaper in terms of gold coins, you could buy more of them a lot faster, and your deck gets stronger than your opponent's deck. Now, I do make an analogy towards Zulok in Hearthstone. In Hearthstone, there's a deck called Zulok, which floods the board very quickly, but lowers your health also very quickly. So you want to defeat your opponent. It's more of an aggressive strategy. With this sort of deck, it is weak to other aggressive strategies. If you're shooting yourself in the face a whole bunch, and your opponent just wants to shoot you in the face, you're basically helping them out. So that is one of the weaknesses of this style of deck. But Reynad also mentions that the vampire has a slower style of deck with leeches to grind down your opponent's life, or make servants to obstruct what your opponent can buy and deal damage to your opponent. This is really good. So having these sorts of like 2 types of decks that you can make, like one aggressive, one control, is really nice. Now, let's say you queue up against a wizard class as you're playing the vampire. The wizard has lots of spells, so you know beforehand that it's very aggressive, very tempo-oriented. With that in mind, you can already start making your deck more control-y rather than shooting yourself in the face a whole bunch, because since you know that they will most likely go for an aggressive strategy, you don't want to just be spending your health too fast. Instead, you would want to be going for the more control style to preserve your health. With that said, since the vampire is so flexible, let's say that you queue up against the wizard and you're like, oh, okay, they're going to go face. But then you see them start picking cards from the potion sub-archetype. And assuming the potion sub-archetype is a more slow, more control style of deck, then you can switch to the more aggro style of vampire, where you start shooting yourself in the face to get stronger cards. So that is one of the ways that you can use skill in this game, of course, using knowledge of the class's abilities and how to counteract them. So that's about it for the vampire. So next we have the chef. The chef is one of the builder type classes. There's two main ones that Reynad has mentioned so far. We'll get into the other one later. But so with the chef is you get ingredients to make dishes. The way that you get ingredients is by killing chicken or cow monsters. Well, these are just the examples that Reynad gives in his video. It's not confirmed that this will be the exact method. But as for now, you can kind of get the idea, right? You're killing chicken or cow monsters or just monsters in general to get ingredients. Those ingredients will get shuffled into your deck, and then you then want to draw them and play them in a certain order or in a certain combo to make dishes. And what dishes do is provide the chef player with very powerful temporary buffs in order to win the game. Now, with builder type classes, since you are shuffling ingredients into your deck and you want to draw them, it's basically a combo oriented deck. So with combo decks, drawing draw effects to cycle through your deck are very important. And keeping your deck thin is also very important. Since this is a deck building game and your deck does get bigger over the course of the game, you don't want to make it too big or else you're not going to draw your key combo pieces. So cycle is very powerful and keeping your deck thin is very powerful. Now, Reynad also mentions that this class has like meme potential. And what I'm assuming that means is that like there'll be certain games where you just draw like the perfect ingredients at just the right time to just fucking destroy your opponent. And you know that's the meme. It's gonna be on Reddit. You're gonna get fucking famous. There you go, right? But obviously that's not gonna happen too often. And I don't think that means that this is a meme class. I'm sure it'll be competitively viable if this game does turn out to be competitive. But it just means that, you know, if you're very lucky, some crazy shit could happen. Alright, so whoops. Alright, so now we have the merchant. So the merchant is one of the more interesting classes from the Bazaar, and Reynad says it's his favorite class. So in other classes, you want to spend your money, your gold coins, to buy cards to shuffle into your deck so you can play those more powerful cards. The merchant's a little bit different. You spend your gold coins to buy more valuable coins, or gold bars, as Reynad mentions. So basically what this means is like, so here's an example. In your store, there's going to be something called like a diamond coin, right? So you spend 2 gold coins to buy this diamond coin, and when you draw the diamond coin from your deck, it'll be worth 2 gold coins by itself. What that means is if you buy enough of these diamond coins, once again, it's just an example, but if you buy enough of these diamond coins, eventually will come a turn when you have like 5 diamond coins in your hand, and instead of having 5 money or 5 currency to use in one turn, you would have 10, which is 5 more than your opponent. So you could have these like huge burst economy turns where you could just buy like ultra powerful cards or do something crazy with it. So that's the advantage of the merchant. With the money, you can buy mercenaries to fight for you. And Reynad mentions that there's also an alternate win condition for the merchant where you just stuff your deck with enough cards, and if your deck gets too big, it'll just auto win you the game. You can do this so by buying gems, which Reynad mentions are just like kind of like filler for your deck to just help cycle, or just any random cheap card that you find in the store, like any 1-cost card that you just buy a ton of to fill up your deck. This alternate win condition that he talks about, basically it's just filling up your deck with enough cards. I'm assuming that every class in the Bazaar will have this alternate win condition, where every class, if you just fill it up with enough cards, you'll auto win the game, kind of like how fatigue works in Hearthstone. I just think that the reason why Reynad mentions it with the merchant specifically is because the merchant will have the easiest and most efficient way of doing this because they'll have so much money. But I do believe every class will be able to have this alternate win condition if the game just goes on long enough for some reason. Of course, that's not confirmed or anything like that, but that would just make the most sense to me. Reynad says that this is the least aggressive class. It's combo and control oriented. Now, what that means is that the merchant will need a lot of defensive tools. If all you're doing throughout the game is just buying more and more money, while your opponent is buying really powerful cards to hit you in the face, you're going to need some defensive tools to stay alive. One of the Hearthstone analogies that I have for this is kind of like Wild Growth for Druid. Wild Growth is a card that you play that costs 2 mana, and it gives you an extra mana crystal for the remainder of the game. Now, it is a very powerful card because you basically have 1 more mana crystal than your opponent for the rest of the game, but For 2 mana, you're basically doing nothing, so you're sacrificing tempo for value. If you play this on turn, if you play Wild Growth on turn 2, you're not doing anything. And let's say your opponent plays a 2-cost minion that starts hitting you in the face. Well, now you're behind on tempo. But of course, the strength is, since you're ahead on value, you can use your value to eventually overpower your opponent in the later stages of the game, which I'm sure Merchant will be able to do. But that is just one of the weaknesses that you should look out for. If you're the Merchant and you queue up against a super aggressive Wizard or something like that, you're going to have to think about how to stay alive in the game. Alright, so next we have the Engineer, which is the second builder type class. Very similar to the Chef in that instead of gathering ingredients, it gathers parts of a machine to make the machine. The example that Reynad gives is like an arm of a robot, leg of a robot, head of a robot, and if you gather all those pieces, then you can make a big robot to just win the game. Once again, it rewards mechanics like drawing your cards to assemble the robot pieces. It is essentially a combo deck. Once again, keeping your deck as thin as possible to draw just the key cards will also most likely be very important. What Reynad stresses is that the playstyle of the Engineer and Chef will be very different. He doesn't want them to just be different skins of the same class. Now, how will he do this? I'm not 100% sure, because gathering and drawing ingredients seems very similar to gathering and drawing parts. But I do believe that it will be very possible to make the Engineer and Chef completely different classes. One of the another Hearthstone analogy that I'll give, again, since I'm a Hearthstone player, is Zulok and Tempo Mage in Hearthstone. Both of these decks are very aggressive. They want to end the game as quickly as possible, but they do so in completely different ways. Zulok wants to get the board as quickly as possible and then keep the board, and that's how they win the game. If Zulok ever loses the board, they will lose the game. With Tempo Mage, getting the board is very important in the early stages of the game, but when you transition to the mid game and late game, you can just use burn spells to attack your opponent's face directly, and even if you lose the board, you can still win. So they're two very different playstyles. The way that they win the game is actually quite different, but they are within the same general like overarching archetype of aggressive style deck. So I think this is kind of what Reynad means. So these will both be builder types, but the way that they go about it will be completely different, which I'm looking forward to. So the last class is the archeologist. This class was very, very briefly mentioned in the video. Reynad almost mentions it as like a sort of like a side thing, but we will know that it will be in the class. What Reynad mentions that it can do is you'll like buy like the horn of a triceratops or something in the store, and then eventually you'll be able to buy all the pieces of the dinosaur and assemble it in your hand, and then you'll have a dinosaur or something like that, and that'll be your win condition. Again, he doesn't give too much details, but he does mention it, so we are very sure that that is a class that is going to be available in the game. I do think that about sums up all the classes that Reynad has talked about so far. If I'm missing anything, feel free to let me know, but I do think that that's everything for now. Now, Reynad mentions in his Q&A video that the Bazaar will be very different from Slay the Spire and Hearthstone. These are two games that I make comparisons to in my first video, and it's actually kind of funny. It's almost like, to me anyway, it seems like Reynad like watched that video and he's like, oh, is this what people think? I hope I better let them know. Obviously, it's not like he's addressing me specifically or anything like that. I'm sure a lot of people also made similar comparisons, but to me, it definitely seems like he's talking to me specifically. But anyway, I do want to make sure that people are aware. It's true that I made comparisons to Slay the Spire and Hearthstone in my last video, but the Bazaar truly is a completely different game. It's its own game. One of the reasons it's very different from Slay the Spire is that it's multiplayer rather than single player, which is a huge difference. That should not be understated. The difference between a multiplayer game and a single player game is it's obviously like night and day. It doesn't use mana in any way. Now, both Slay the Spire and Hearthstone do use mana, but the Bazaar has the currency system, like Star Realms and other deck building games, that the gold coins where you buy the cards to shuffle them into your deck. This is fundamentally different from mana. This makes the entire way that the game works completely different from games like Hearthstone. So that should also be mentioned. And of course, the gameplay itself is around making your deck stronger. So in a game like Slay the Spire, the deck building is just a side feature. What that means is the battle sections of the game and the deck building portions of the game are separate. In Slay the Spire, every battle you use the exact same set of cards, and it's only after the battle is over where you can add stronger cards or get rid of weaker cards. It's actually Hearthstone is also very similar in that the battle portion and the deck building portions are completely separate. In Hearthstone, you build a deck of 30 cards that you choose, and when you play against the opponent, all you will have at your disposal are those 30 cards that you put in. With the Bazaar, it's completely different. You're buying cards that show up in a pool at the store, and then you make your deck stronger throughout the course of the game. And every game, your deck will be, even if you play the same class, your deck will be different. So that is one of the core differences between the Bazaar and Slay the Spire and Hearthstone. Okay, so now I'm going to talk about the in-game currency. Reynad mentions what money will be used for, like real life money will be used for in the game. He does stress it'll be used mainly for cosmetic purposes like skins, board decorations, golden cards, stuff like that. He will have a pack system or like a chest system for unlocking golden cards and other cosmetics. One of the things that I am slightly worried about is that one of the purposes of in-game currency is to buy and unlock other classes of the game. Now, one of the reasons why this might be a problem is in the very when this game is first released and there's only like 5 classes available, this shouldn't be a problem at all. If you get 3 classes to start and you have to buy 2 more classes, just by playing the game a little bit, you should be able to grind out the money to get those other 2 classes without having to spend any real money. But let's say later in the game, there's like 15 classes or like 30 classes. Okay, maybe that's too much, but like 15 classes or something like that. If someone's willing to spend money on the game, they can have access to all of those classes earlier and be more familiar with and know all the cards of that class earlier than someone who is just free to play. That is a slight cause for concern. I don't think that should be a problem though. I don't think it will be a problem, but I do think it is worth mentioning as something that might potentially be like pay to win sort of kind of thing. But once again, I do want to make sure it's clear that I don't think this will actually be an issue, but it's just something worth mentioning, something to look out for. Reynad also mentions that he wants board cosmetics, right? That you can customize and that both you and your opponent will be able to see. Like if you like throw a rock at your opponent, he'll be able to see that you throw the rock at them. One of the coolest thing that he actually mentions with this is he wants like a beach, like a beach sort of board cosmetic where you could draw in the sand and your opponent can see what you draw. If that's actually put into the game, that's gonna be like the biggest like BM supplier of all time. Like so much so, if this game is competitive, I think it'll probably be like banned from tournaments or something like that, just so you can't like fuck with your opponent's mind. Now once again, all the Reynad does shoot off a whole bunch of ideas in his video, but none of them are confirmed, so we don't know what will actually be in the final product or not. But I am very excited that these are some of the stuff that Reynad has in mind that he wants to implement into the game. Because if he does put that beach thing in there, yo, this game's gonna be wild. All right. So the store system. Now remember, deck building games like the Bazaar work off a store system where you buy cards from a store. Reynad wanted to make use of the digital interface of the Bazaar. It is made for PC and mobile, so he wants to make sure that the electronic portion of the game is heavily utilized, which makes it unique to games like Star Realms or Dominion, which can be played on a tabletop. Now, the way that he wants to make use of the digital interface is by making certain items appear more or less frequently. He basically wants to control the rarity of certain item drops. By doing it this way, he says it'll free up a lot of design space, which I agree with, and it'll also make balancing a lot easier, which I also agree with, since if the card is too powerful, he could just make it appear less often, and if it's too weak, if it's too weak, I don't know if he'll make it appear more often, but you get the point. If a card is too powerful, he can make it more rare. By doing it this way, he can create legendary cards that are strictly more powerful. They're just baseline more powerful cards than regular cards. But they'll show up less frequently, obviously, or more frequently if you buy a card that like buffs the chance of legendary cards spawning in your store. The reason why this can't be done in games like Hearthstone is because if a legendary card is strictly better than another card, it really incentivizes pay to win. People who are willing to spend money in the game will just have better decks than their opponents. To counteract this problem, Hearthstone started to make legendary cards more unique rather than just strictly more powerful. But this does kind of make the excitement of legendary cards not as cool. But by just affecting the rarity of their drop in the store, Reynad can create really cool and very powerful legendary cards and just make them appear not too frequently. Remember, both players start out with the same cards in their deck every game. Like, if using my 10 gold coin example from the start of the video, both players will always start out with 10 gold coins, and the chances of legendaries will be appearing for both of them will be equal. So it's not like there's going to be a game where your opponent just starts off with legendaries already in his deck. That's impossible. So this way, having strong legendary cards will just be balanced, since the chance of appearance will be the same for both opponents. This guarantees certain win conditions to also appear in a timely manner. So taking the engineer class, for example. Let's say you buy like the leg of a robot, and in order to complete the robot, you also need to be able to buy the arm and the head of the robot from the store. If the store is completely random, and you just get super unlucky, there will be games where you buy the leg of the robot, and the arm and the head just never appear in the store. So you don't even have like a chance to buy it. If that happens, that feels really bad for the player, and that kind of sucks. So by being able to affect the rarity of drops, Reynad can guarantee that if you buy the leg of a robot, the arm and the head will appear in a certain amount of time. Therefore your win condition is guaranteed. Like it will show up, and there's no possible way you can get like super unlucky and it won't show up. I think that's a very that's a great game mechanic. It really rewards the player for buying cards instead of punishing them. So that's about it for the store system. Alright, so that's about it for the video. My parting message though is to take your time, Reynad, and just make a great game. Reynad, if you're watching this, and you made it all the way to the end, props to you, man. I don't even know how you did that, but congrats. And my message to you, as I'm sure a lot of people will also agree with, is that we want a great game, right? Like, just think of the video that I made before, right? People are so passionate about this game that when someone misrepresents it, just like how I did in my previous video, they're upset because they want this game to succeed. I also want this game to succeed. I just didn't do a great job of expressing that in my first video, I guess. But people who've played Hearthstone, people who've played deck building games, they want this game to be awesome. And I think this game has a ton of potential. It is the first of its kind. It's a very pioneering game. One, in the sense that it's a deck building game made specifically for the digital format. And two, it's the first time, well, in my knowledge anyway, that a player, someone who's played video games a ton, really loves them, is making his own game. He's just like, you know what? I love card games so much. Let me just make my own. There are so many ways that this game is so exciting and so cool for a lot of players like me, and all the people watching this video. So we really want this game to be awesome. Now, I want my hands on that open beta as soon as possible, just like anybody else. But even more importantly than that, I want this game to be as polished and as awesome and as cool as possible. So Reynad, don't rush the game. Hopefully, if you watch this or if this message gets out to you, we want a completely awesome game. So don't feel the need to get it out sooner by taking some shortcuts. Just make the game great, and I'm sure we'll all appreciate it. So yeah, that's about it for the video. Once again, I do hope that I've shown that I'm trying to improve my content. I am now more educated and more knowledgeable about the deck building game format, or at least from what I've shown, hopefully. So hopefully my content will have more substance, and people will respect a little bit more. No guarantees, but we could always hope. I hope you enjoyed the content. Whenever the next update is, which I'm super excited for, I'll definitely make another discussion video talking about it. Thank you so much for watching, and let's hope this is a great game, right? Let's hope the Bazaar is awesome.